It appears to be getting close to time.
I posted the agenda in the chat, and boy, did the formatting get whacked up.
A couple more people still popping in. I'll give a minute or two more. So Russ and I believe, are both in the note-taking tool along with some others. It would be oh so helpful if someone would take the lead on taking some notes. You have many assistants, it appears, in the note-taking tool as well.
Yeah, hi, this is Rich. I'll do it.
Thank you, sir. Just earned yourself an imbibement of choice at the next meeting. Karsten, are you having trouble with Meet Echo?
Yes, I'm still trying to find out how I can.
We heard you, for whatever that's worth. Yes, Russ was muted. And is. I don't see Jay in the room. I was expecting him to be here.
He sent a note to me that he will miss when I resent the agenda.
Shoot. Oh.
Hi there.
Hi, join seemed to be slowing down, so maybe we better get going.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. All right. Well, Russ kindly posted the agenda in the chat, and it is now copied into the note-taking tool if you are playing along, and we do appreciate if you do play along. So the main order of business for today is to get straight what it is the group thinks it's doing with the implemented document, because the conversation on the list seems to be jumping around in ways that your chairs did not expect. And so
Before we jump into that, just remind people we are not an IETF working group, but we are following the note well.
yes, so please do comport yourselves with the same rules that we apply to most IETF meetings. If you have questions about what those are, please let your chairs know. We are happy to point them out to you. So I don't know, Russ, how do you want to handle this particular discussion?
Well, I think the first thing is we should look at Ecker's description of defining 1 and 2, completing the documentation of the current implemented tool as 1, and 2 being creating a document of the desired grammar. If those are not the desired work products, then we have a very much different conversation to have. So I'd like to start confirming that that's what people think we want to do. And I've noticed my screen is blinking red off and on. So I'm going to
Yes.
turn the camera
And
off.
your mic is clipping a bit as well. You might want to turn down your gain a bit.
Okay, I could do that.
So does anybody want to jump in? Or let's start with an easier question if folks don't like the way Russ put it. Does anybody disagree with the view that those are our two intended work products? I know this is a terribly shy group of humans here. Karsten, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me well because I'm not at my usual workstation.
Yep, doing fine.
Great. I see our work as a process and not as two products, so I'm having a hard time following this part of the discussion. But I think I do agree that we want to complete the documentation of the production RFC XML that we are using today, and that we want to use our wonderful discussion we have had to identify the highest importance items that we want to get fixed in the XML form. But of course, we have 25 other things we need to do. But with respect to vocabulary, I think those are the things we want to do now.
And to repeat for Colin, there, Robert was nice enough to paste it into the chat. Yes. Task 1, completing documentation of what's currently implemented in the tool. Task 2, creating a document of the desired grammar. Paul, our fearless document editor, has jumped into
Co-editor.
Yes, sir.
So we just finished putting out all of the queries, and we got, I was surprised at some of the responses. Not that I hate this, that was expected, but some of the responses are, that's not new, and so we need to go back and check those. But some of the responses were, that's possible, but the RPC is not doing it. Therefore, we shouldn't document it. And I have a concern about that, which is we are then going to rat hole again. So I'm, as co-author, and I will speak for John because he loves me to speak for him. John Levine, that is. Clenson never likes it when I speak for him, and I never like it when he speaks for me. We're happy to do whatever the working group wants, but we don't want to start doing a bunch of work and having you all change your mind again, because if the work we're doing involves ripping something out and then you change your mind, it's a buttload harder for us. So I would like more of a statement of work rather than completing the documentation of what is currently implemented in the tool. So there's lots of tools involved here. And some of the tools are just checking. Some of them are, in fact, being used to produce PDF text and HTML. We need a little bit more definition here of what that is. But if we have that definition, sure, this seems just fine.
Okay. That helped. Thank you. Julian, you're up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Just fine.
Okay, so I wanted to give a perspective of what might happen from the point of view of somebody who might be responsible for some of the confusion, because I have to admit that at some point in the past, I mostly tuned out of the discussion because it was about how this group was going to things instead of actually doing them. So once Paul posted the actual list of things he was interested in on feedback, I, of course, jumped in and provided feedback, no matter whether it was the feedback that was currently being asked for. So I think the same thing might have happened to other people as well. So it's not that this was on purpose. It was just a natural thing to happen when people didn't stop paying attention and now were actually asked concrete questions. So that's what happened for me, and maybe the same thing happened for others as well.
Fair enough. And so I will take it that your response to the question is, for some version of those two work products, process-wise, you're fine. It's just that you may have been contributing in a way that did not exactly follow that process.
Yeah, and just to make sure, the list of two things that the group actually wants to ship, I totally agree with.
Good. Okay, Ecker?
Yes, so I largely agree with this list as well, as I suggested it. I do think that there is a sort of some ambiguity about the second work product, namely that I know people have talked about doing like major revisions of XML v3, but I think that like as an intermediate work product, what we want to do is assess whether whether the list of things that are in as implemented but not in 7991 are things we want on a case by case basis without like so I mean there's a foo tag and we're like, okay, we like the foo tag and we're keeping it, or we don't like the foo tag and we're throwing it away, or we're deprecating it, or we don't like the foo tag and but we have to replace it with a bar tag, are all three separate things. And that's like different as opposed to like, no, we decided that actually we're converting to S expressions or something, or we're doing radical re-architecture. So I think like, the way I think about this is what we're trying to do is clean up, is backfill the mistakes that were made, and then we can move forward from there. I was hoping, I see Paul's in the queue. Maybe hope we want to jump the queue, or we can wait for it. Paul, you sort of said something about things that were technically possible that the RPC wasn't doing. Would you mean like there's a tag or an affordance in XML to RFC, but the RPC doesn't use it, even if other people do, they take it out? Is that what you mean?
Yes. So, and I think that was pointed out, and I did not keep close notes yet. And if it turns out that list is 0, great. But yeah, I was talking about when people said that's not true, and I was like, okay, and then we can look at that later.
For what it's worth, my view on this, I think, is roughly what Martin Thompson sort of been saying, which is our job is to specify the format that is used to publish RFCs. And so if it is a practical matter, even if it is in the tool, but the RPC never published an RFC with it and no one intends to, then I think it doesn't really exist for the purpose of this discussion. Other people might feel differently, of course.
Wait, Ecker, don't go away. If that is the case, where someone said, well, where we discover that there is an addition to 7991 that is in this list, and the RPC is not doing it, either because they're holding their nose or they just haven't had an opportunity, what would you propose we do for this next document? Would you say we take it out because it hasn't been put in an RFC, or we leave it in because it's been discussed?
I would take it out because I claim it doesn't exist for the purpose of RFCs.
Thank you.
All right, Robert, you're up.
So, I think both Ecker and Paul should stay close to the mic. I think implicit in what I just heard is that you are then asking the RPC to not use these things that they have not yet used, if they exist. Is that true?
I think it would be slightly better, but I'm not going to give Ben a shape about it one way or the other.
So would you, an alternative to taking it out would be shoving them in a section of the document that says, and these exist, but were not used. Would that be harmful?
I don't think so. I think what would be harmful, obviously, would be, say, if we have a document that's an archival document that says these aren't used and then they're used, right? That'd be bad.
Yeah.
But no, it's not like if someone, like, just to like try to expand the aperture a little bit. If someone said, like, actually, I feel strongly they should be in the document because they're in XML to RFC at some point, even though they were never used, I'm not going to like lie down the road. You know, I don't feel strongly about that piece at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I am definitely more interested in having a documentation of the bits that we're leaving around that we're calling RFCs than I am documenting, the possible set of bits that the XML to RFC code could generate. I would like to ask that as we nail this down, we make sure that we make it easier and not harder to start changing XML to RFC and changing it sooner rather than later.
Do you want to go down that path a little further? What do you mean by that?
So we have two things. There are things going into bucket 2 that we think are bugs, like dot name, which is a pretty important bug, and the address tuple, which I think we've got pretty much universal agreement that dot name is a horrible bug, and then we've got mostly agreement that what was happening in address was a bad idea and that we need to quit it. I would like for us to find a path that lets us make these changes to XML to RFC and change what is coming out in future RFCs early, and not necessarily wait until we publish an output of 2. Now, I'm not going to die on that hill, but also, if we get to the end of 1, but not to the end of 2, and the not used is universally agreed that we're not going to use, if it would ease us from a maintenance burden to remove it before we got to the end of 2, I would like to be able to do that.
Got it. That makes sense. All right, John Clemson.
I'm going to find myself, despite Paul's disclaimers, agreeing with him, however novel that may be. I think we need to get a document of what we have as implemented, where what the words as implemented mean are as implemented, rather than discussing what has been used, what has not been used, what should be used, what shouldn't be used, and whether or not it's Tuesday or Wednesday, and anything else along those lines. I think we have a straightforward project of documenting what's implemented, and I think we got to get that done. I think following that, some of Paul's comments and several of Robert's suggest what I fear is a 1.5 independent of your 2.0 and your 1 and 2 classification. And that is that once we have the as implemented document on the table and we agree that that's what's implemented, that we then go have the discussion of things which were implemented which shouldn't have been, things which the RPC is horribly wishing had been implemented, and the rest of the things which go into, I think, Robert's suggestion about getting to the stage where we understand, or they understand, what should be put into XML or RFC, or taken out of it, or put in with warnings, or whatever else along those lines. And I hope we can get from 1 to 2 without doing that intermediate stage. But if the amount of argumentation and quibbling and going back and forth that I've seen over should this be there or should this not be there, is indicative. We may need that intermediate stage. And to use a different version of what Julian had to say, I'm finding myself tuning in and out of this group, largely because when we get long threads of comments and counter comments among a relatively small number of people about topics which my gut tells me either don't make any difference or are part of either the 1.5 or the 2.0 debate, but certainly not the 1.0 debate, I tune out. And I suspect I'm not the only one.
Fair enough. No, appreciated. That actually makes a reasonable amount of sense. I'm hearing from different corners that 2 should be closer to what you're calling 1.5 or closer to some grand discussed new thing. And I think that's probably deciding what that is probably a next step. Getting the division right, I think, is probably
Indeed, and a different way of making my comment is that if we can't agree what 2 is really about, then that may be an argument for 1.5.
Got it.
And in particular, I'm concerned about whether, as far as 2 is concerned, the goal of this group is to produce a document and a specification which is targeted to those people who, for better or worse, are actually writing in the RFC XML language, which we still have specifications encourage people to do, or something which is much closer to a document production language for use exclusively for the RPC. And I hope we can avoid having that conversation today, but I think that conversation becomes critical to understanding what 2 is about. And again, if we need a 1.5 to help us get there, or we need a 1.5 because that's going to take us forever, then I think we really ought to be considering a 1.5.
All right, thank you. Paul, you are up and last in the queue.
I'm last in the queue for now, but I've got 4 things, so I suspect other people will jump in. Clenson, I was unfortunately agreeing with you right up until almost the last moment when you said, I hope we don't need to talk about that topic today. That topic being the parts of the vocabulary that are only for draft authors, not for the RPC. I believe, and again, I'm saying this in surprise, I believe we do need to talk about that before we finish the as implemented, because some of the things that people are saying aren't used by the RPC. They're completely correct. They aren't used by the RPC, but they are used by authors. I don't have a preference for how we go, but I believe that is absolutely a topic that many people were commenting on in the last couple of weeks as I was putting those things out. And therefore, we need to decide that before we know what the end of the as implemented document is.
Curiously enough, we're again mostly in agreement.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought so. That's why I just, you said you hope we don't talk about it today. I'm not saying we should finish it today, but we do need to have this discussion real soon now. I wouldn't have said that a month ago.
It is certainly the case that if our decision is going to be that the only thing this working group cares about is the publication form rather than anything which authors use to communicate the working group's review process, then again, using my 1.5 metaphor, there are probably some things in your as implemented document which we ought to publicly hold our noses about. However, I think the as implemented document ought to reflect what's implemented. I think that's very nearly an oxymoron. And that these discussions about what should be added and what should be taken out are a discussion of some later phase, whether it's 2 or 1.2, And we better get on that in a hurry if we're really going to say things like the RPC doesn't use that, and therefore we shouldn't be in the language, or therefore bugs in XML to RFC, which involve that, shouldn't be fixed because they're irrelevant, or anything else that takes us down that path.
Okay, great. So we are in agreement on that. That was only one of my points. But that
Good, I was my camera off again.
Okay, that dovetails into a second one, which has come up occasionally and affects our whole process of doing this as implemented, and particularly in as implemented for things that are not in the RPC, which is some people say more than once, oh, this isn't policy. And this working group is only supposed to be working on policy about our RFC publication. And I would be very bummed for us to spend a bunch more time and then have the should we have spent this time discussion come up. I would I would like it to come up and be resolved quickly. I want the chairs to keep focus on it in one thread, and a particular thread that might have the word policy in the subject, not because it has come up on some of the random things that I was putting up, like, lists have T and, like whatever. And then, so I think we need to do that. And part of that discussion has to be what John and I were just talking about, which is it even acceptable for us to talk about parts of the grammar that don't affect RFC publication? Namely, they affect the input to the RFC series. Don't have a strong opinion. I bet that I will, but I don't have one now. Pete, I've got two more.
Let me just, before they fall out of my brain, let me just make the comment, and Russ can obviously disagree with me if he wants. My sense from the beginning was that we decided that the grammar itself was in scope as a policy issue, maybe on the fuzzy end of what those words mean, but we are going to work on that, and certainly as implemented is in scope, and we are working on it, and you wouldn't normally call that policy. We may get to a point in the number 2 document where we say, well, this should or should not fall within the scope of the working group. Russ?
Well, I think we're in agreement, so let's just move on. But I thought we'd make sure
I
the
don't
minute
want
to say
to
that.
just move on, Pete. I want you to say that on the list, and to be as unfuzzy. I like your fuzz, but to be as unfuzzy as possible, and make it as a chair statement, so that if someone disagrees, it could come to the list. And if they disagree with the chair statement, they can go to, the higher powers. But I would like that as a preemptive, shut up, we don't want to talk about this. Or as you get to talk about it for a week and then you don't get to talk about it. Because it'll be easy for it to come up. And again, in the example that people brought up that John and I were just talking about, how can you have this working group talking about a policy for something that is not about the RFCs themselves, that they are about drafts? It's a reasonable question, but I think you have a reasonable answer, but I want that out there, okay? I'm sorry, wearing my co-author hat and my co-author who doesn't want to waste his time hat. I want you like saying that as chairs. Third topic is one that I think is easy to deal with, but again, it came up a bunch during this, the other topics, is the prep tool, which is a document which is one of the tools. So when we say, what is the RPC using? We know they're using prep tool because if you look at any of the elements, they've got a bunch of crap in them. And they have a bunch of crap because the prep tool told them they had to put the crap in. And as Martin Thompson, who's not on the call, said to me sometime last week, he goes, "God, that was a stupid mistake. I want to know who did it." And I said, me? So, I mean, Joe and I, but that we did make that mistake. That's important because some of the attributes we're talking about really only apply to the prep tool. So that is as implemented today, but I want to be sure that we aren't taking those out and putting them in later because the RPC is doing them. And I agree, by the way, with Robert's earlier request that before either or as we're getting close to being done on as implemented, we start talking about and finish talking about what is the process for what happens after it. Great. I think I've said enough.
All good. Thanks. Julian.
Regarding Paul's second point, if this group came to the conclusion that things that are not relevant for the RPC are not in scope, then we would be left with the question, who else will do it? I mean, there are many things that we can put into the grammar that helps authors, which are not really that important for the RPC. For instance, one thing that just came to mind was defining standard formats for binary messages or for hex dumps or stuff like that, where the RPC would only be the recipient, but not really interested in how it was generated. And things like that can be done by preprocessors, but I don't think, and I've been doing things like that since I started the XSLT work, which I think is 20 years ago. So all of this can be done in the preprocessor. Carsten's Markdown tool is a preprocessor as well. So we can offer all kinds of authoring tools that will generate something that is only relevant to the RPC, but it would be very good to have a point where to discuss these extensions and to maybe have implementers agree on them, even if it's not this group.
Go ahead, Robert.
All right, so some examples that go beyond Julian's examples of things that we could talk about somewhere would be extensions to grammar that would only be used during authoring and never appear in the artifacts of what was published as an RFC. Markup to allow tracking issues, markup to allow capturing review comments and the resolution of those review comments, things like this, right? Brief discussion of those things in these lists because these are all the people that are interested in them, I think should be encouraged. Rat holing should be carefully shepherded by the chairs and pushed away to, you guys are talking about something that's not really this group, even if you are those guys, please go talk about them somewhere else for a while until we get these other things done.
Julian, you're back up. Or were you just left in the queue and we didn't remove you? We will assume you were left in the queue. Alexis.
I'm wondering if, speaking to the difference between things that end up only being used by authors versus things that end up in the, or by the prep tool versus things that end up in the published XML. It seems to me that in version 1 of as used, we might still want to include those things and just specifically say that they are things that are only used in kind of prepping documents or authoring documents. Just as a record of, I would guess I would hate to, in version 2 of this, have to relitigate, are these things that we should remove? Are these things we should, whatever. If we put them in version 1, we could just say that they're only controlled by the RPC. We could say the RPC will document any further changes on authors.ietf.org, and this is now totally up to them. you know, I think that there is a good reason to put them in to our output 1 here, just for the sake of clarity for the future.
Thanks. Good point. And I've heard others who are, it sounded to me, leaning in the direction of we may need to, at some point as a group, make a policy statement about what things appear in the tool, appear in authoring tools, appear in the final output that is on the website, and how we document those becomes a different kind of question. So thanks. Paul, you appear to be next.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree both with Robert and with Lexis. I believe I'm disagreeing with Robert about that it should be on this list. As soon as it's on this list, we're gonna rat hole. We are better at doing that than like V6 Ops is. So I believe that it would be cleaner if there was another list that was not a working group list, just another mailing list supported. And it could, quite frankly, be supported by the IETF. It does not have to be supported by the RFC editor, because it's about creating IETF objects, which are drafts. And then every time it comes, every time anything like that comes up on this list, we can say, no, 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 take it over there. Stop talking about it here. No, we really mean it. And the reason I disagree with Alexis is related, which is I believe that, in fact, if we go that route where there is a place to talk about it, and anyone who's doing a tool, whether it is maintaining an old tool, creating a new tool, or whatever, has an idea about something that would require putting something in the XML, that it is cleanly over there, and then it will be completely clear in as implemented that as implemented is just for the RPC. I think we could put a very hand-wavy appendix saying, earlier we discussed these elements, but notice they're not even in the grammar above. And there is now a discussion of these and other things like them over there. I think that's going to make it a lot cleaner, and I think it will cause us to have many fewer discussions of what is policy. Is this policy? Do we get to discuss it? The easiest way in my mind to not discuss it, and again, I am trying to get this thing done, is to shove it all over to a place that's not a working group, that the people who care most about it, which I believe is the tool authors and their fanboys, of which I am one, can do that over there.
And I think that gets to the comment I made in the chat about there's a question of what we're doing, and then there's a question of how we're doing it. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to skip the process suggestion that Paul just made, other than expressing a concern that we have a collection of healthy rats with good digging skills, and that trying to distribute things into different lists could easily result in rat holes on both lists rather than rat holes on one. But I'm not sure. I do think, and I think I disagree with Alexis in this. I want to see an as implemented document which is about as implemented and as free of editorial comments, judgments, and other opinions as possible. Because as soon as we start editorializing in that document or making observations about what should or should not be there, then we are digging ourselves in again. And I would like to see the as implemented document finished, reflecting what's implemented, and then to the degree necessary, we go off and debate on as a 1.5 or on Paul's list or somewhere else, what was a mistake to either include or not include on our way to topic 2. This also raises a separate problem about topic 2. Logically, we may be talking about 3 separate languages here, not even 2 separate languages, but 3. Language number 1 is a document used by is a specification used by authors to write things which are going to be discussed in the IETF or some other stream in the process of agreeing on whether or not it should be published. We think we understand that one, but we keep going around in circles about it. Document number 3 is the thing which should be published as the stable, official, what have you, canonical, if you don't mind, form of an RFC. It needs to be very stable, should contain a minimum of clutter. For those of us who still believe in generic markup, it should contain a minimum of formatting fuss. Document number 2 is whatever the RPC needs to do in order to do formatting. Now, and the formatting, particularly in the 3 presentation forms, if that's RFC XML version X, that's fine. If it is more CSS stuff, that's fine. If it's XSLT, it's fine. If it's back to NROF, it's fine. But that ought to be purely an RPC problem with which neither this working group nor the working group Paul's talking about ought to be spending time getting obsessed about. That's a formatting language problem. So now I put all the way into it.
Well, go ahead, Alexis. Maybe you can step on John's foot or something like that.
No, actually, I think John brings up a good point. I smushed 2 things together. So for the as implemented, my point really was I would like anything that actually gets used in any part of the process to be documented. And if the as implemented basically just says this thing is used in this part of the process versus this thing is used in the published XML, I think that's perfectly sufficient. If we don't feel up to, or we think it belongs in a separate document, the idea of, and now the RPC controls these things that don't end up in the document, or whatever the solution there is, if that goes in a different document, or we decide not to do it or whatever, totally fine. But I do think that anything that gets used in the process, it would be best to actually document it in output number 1 there.
If I can sneak in for a moment, just respond briefly to Alexis. My only concern is that I think we need to give the RPC maximum flexibility without coming back to this group on a day-to-day basis about whether they are or not doing it. And insofar as we believe that, it makes what the RPC is using a very, very volatile question. And I would like to see the as implemented document describe what's implemented, put a lid on it, avoid getting into separate discussions about what should or should not, or has not, or might in the future be done as part of that document, because as soon as we do that, I think we're in a rat hole again.
So I don't disagree. I'm not sure we're actually disagreeing. I feel like if it's in the original document and it is being used, it should be in this document, right? Like, I mean, regardless of which part of the process it's being used in. Sorry, I'm saying that badly. Let me start that again. If we are currently using a tag in any part of the process, that is kind of a yes or no question, right? Like, we are or we are not using it. What I'm saying is anything that we are using should be in that document. And if we want to say it's in this part of the process or it's in that part of the process as part of the documentation, I think that's good. I'm not trying to invite, should it be there, whatever, because in my brain, this is the as implemented. We literally are using this or we are not.
All right, Elliot, you're in.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. I just only have a single question at this point, which, noting that it's a quarter to the top of the hour, I was wondering if the chairs have a sense of where the room is and whether we're able to come to some conclusions. Sorry to be the poker on that one, but I think we're running
No,
out of
no,
time.
fair enough. Russ, you want to make a stab at summary? I'm happy to as well.
At the highest level, yes, we have agreed that we're doing the two documents. And I think the grayness about where the edges are, I heard way more agreement than disagreement, which is very encouraging. And so I think that was where we need to focus and get going. And I would like to hear more about the last part we talked about. How is the as implemented published? Is it just the author's page or is it an RFC? That part we haven't talked about.
Ecker, you wanted to jump in on something else? Yeah.
That is what I came to talk about. Is as it
Ah.
So yes, I do not think we should have an app as implemented RFC. This was not a the part of the problem here is decisions are not made by a consensus process, and I think that like we should not be elevating them by having an RFC. So I think there should be, I think it'd be fine to have either of the following two things. One, a author's page that is implemented, or conversely a RFC which was as implemented with the things that were we decided we didn't like in a deprecated section. So I do not think but I do not think we should publish a pure as implemented with no commentary on the things that were not consensus and we think are bad.
Go ahead, John.
In an odd way, Ecker got ahead of me, which is good, maybe. I'm not simply convinced this needs to be published as an RFC, but I do believe it needs to be done in state as distinct from a document which we or anybody else is tinkering with on an ongoing basis. So it's really not as implemented as a foundation for further things, but as implemented right now and subject to change tomorrow. I think that's a very important distinction. Whether it's published as an RFC or not is a separate issue. And I don't really care, except that what Ecker then described is my document 1.5. It's this document with all of that, all the commentary and reflections and deprecations and applause that we can agree on attached to it.
Paul.
I would advocate for a stable thing that looks like an RFC because it started as a draft with a date on it that says this will not be up, like this is it for this one. You'll see at another point. I would be happiest with no commentary because commentary indicates working group consensus, which we absolutely don't have. Commentary indicates we've thought well about this, which we obviously haven't because we're discovering new stuff and we're going to discover new stuff next year as well. If we leave it as a page on the author's site, I want to put a little bit of text at the top of it that says, this looks like it's an internet draft. It's not, like we're done. And this looks like an RFC. It's not. We decided not to do it. But the tooling that we have that Julian created, as he said, like 20 freaking years ago, which makes this so that we can have all of the grammar and stuff, is going to make something that looks like a draft or an RFC. And I would like to keep that with just a note at the top.
Elliot?
Okay, so as somebody who believes that RFCs are not some sort of sacrosanct, thing, I actually prefer that we publish things as RFCs. However, I see no chance that this group would ever come to consensus on publishing the as implemented in the current way. I just don't see it. And I am more concerned about what Robert said, which is that I don't want us to get blocked on an argument over the form of the document as getting published, so that Robert can get on with his work, the tooling people can get on with doing more interesting things, and we get on to actually enhancing the grammar to cover use cases that we're not covering. So you won't see me pushing hard for an RFC. I would push harder for us to do the extensions that we think are actually going to make life better for our users. So I'd say let's move on from that discussion and run with what Paul has suggested.
I would like to ask a follow-on question. We have this thing on the author's page that has a little blurb about each of the elements that make up the schema. Is that what we're talking about? Just leaving it there in HTML? And if so, where does that version number go?
It's more than the version of the grammar. I mean, there's
It's a release version, right, Robert?
no, it's also instructions on how we use it.
Indeed. And well, that's the point that Carter's been making over and over.
Yeah. So seriously, like maybe this is useful, maybe it's not, and there's not very many minutes left, so you can tell me just to take this to the list. But what is the precondition? When can I make Prep Tool stop putting the defaults in? Can I do that like today and the next RFC just doesn't have that in it? Is that okay?
So, Robert, that specific question I can answer, which is no, that's not okay, because Prep Tool is still an RFC about a process. So we would have to do another thing, either a policy document or something else, which says you can stop doing Prep Tool or you can just do these parts of Prep Tool. That's quite different than the grammar definition or whatever's in 7991. Carson is correct. It's more than just grammar. But on something where you're asking, can the RPC change its process today to do foo? We actually have to do that on a case-by-case basis. And Prep Tool will be one which hopefully is easy, but is not guaranteed to. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Well, so then we get into the ones that affect the grammar. It's like, can we, are we going to be all the way to what was at the front of this call 2 before we can address what's happening with dot name? So I guess in interest the time that we've got left, and if anybody else can come to the mic, I think some questions to the group that would make sure that our heads are in at least similar places about the timing of the upcoming changes that we have been wanting to have for quite some time, would help us avoid pitfalls later.
Michael?
What I heard Paul's response to Robert was that the contents of what Prep 2 does is a policy decision and is not up to the RPC. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I just wanted to clarify that that's what Paul.
No, absolutely not. No, it is what has been published, and therefore it's what we're supposed to be doing. Whether it's policy or not, or right or not, doesn't matter. But it is what is published currently until we unpublish it or change it.
So it's not up to the RPC to decide that. It's up to us to set that, but it's not a policy. Seems like I think we've struggled with this over and over again as to to what extent we want to micromanage or not micromanage, and that what you're just saying seems to fall right in the middle of that of that space.
I agree. It's the middle.
Okay. All right. So fine. I have no opinion about it, but I just want to be clear. I understand the conflict.
Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I just skimmed through the introduction of that, of what was the number there, 7998, and it's not really clear. You know, if you came up with a different prep tool, or you're mandating, if you say, take it back, this document, the document doesn't mandate a particular instantiation of the prep tool. If the as implemented document were published as an RFC, and it could then also obsolete this document. I mean, it's really having an RFC for every step in the pipeline when we're not the experts in publication, just opinionated rats, doesn't seem like a good way to go. So my answer to Robert's question would be, change it whenever the RPC tells you it's okay. And then we'll fix it later on in the docs.
All right, seeing no one else in the queue, and with only 3 minutes left, I have a sense that Russ and I know where this is going and how to summarize this. I also have a sense that we will remember the process here is someone proposes some policy document and the working group does or does not take it on, and then off we go. Russ and I may be required at some point to solicit someone to write certain kinds of documents that we think might need to be done, and put that out on the list as a request. But we'll see where we're at. And it looks like Russ may have lost connectivity. I think that's as far as we're going to get, but I think that actually accomplished what we were looking for. Russ has come back. So I don't think there is much of anything else to be done today. Russ, do you have anything else?
No, I'm very happy that I think we got there with very little contention, and I'm pleased that so many people have a common vision here.
Yep. So Russ and I will review notes. Julian, did you want to make a quick comment?
Yes, I know that's not very common for the IETF, but maybe we should set us a goal when we actually get at least document 1 done, because this has taken so long, and this is a relatively well-defined work item, and not with that a lot of open questions. We should really set us a goal when to be done with it.
I hear with +1 from others in the room that your chairs may be required to get out prods and other assorted tools to make things happen in a timely manner and choose what that timely manner will be. So Russ and I will put our heads together with the notes that have been taken, get some conclusions out, make sure we're all on the same page, and maybe propose some dates and things that we will be doing on the list going forward. Thank you all. Much appreciated. That was very useful.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
What does your shirt say, Pete?
It's the Tai Chi place that I go to.
Okay. Thanks.
Ciao. Thank you all.